A few weeks ago, I saw the trailer for Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, the fourth movie in the current continuity of the Planet of the Apes franchise. And since I had heard those movies were good, I figured, yeah, sure, I'll go see it, but I should probably watch the rest of the series first. But if I'm going to do that, it might also be a good idea to watch the original series, and the TV show associated with that, and the other Planet of the Apes TV show, and the 2001 reboot. Oh, and I guess I might as well read the original book the first movie is based on. And if I'm going to read one book, I might as well read a few more, like the books associated with the new series, and that's probably enough. There is a lot more, but I have a life. But we're still doing another an in-depth look at series.
We finally really did it. You maniac!
For those of you that don't know, 1968's Planet of the Apes is about an astronaut that, after attempting to travel to a planet far from Earth, ends up on a planet where the dominant species is apes, and humans, while they exist, are practically nothing more than animals that look like people. It's a good movie, and I would recommend you watch it as long as you don't mind some 1960s camp. Now, spoilers for what would be one of the main concepts of the Planet of the Apes franchise, but is a massive reveal at the end of this movie, but this weird ape-run planet is actually Earth thousands of years in the future. Now, the reason I'm telling you this massive twist now is that most of you already know that, and I went into this movie knowing that, and I think it adds intrigue to the rest of the movie. And it also brings up the first in a long line of questions. How did the ship end up there? Well, part of that comes from the concept of time dilation when it comes to moving at an incredibly high speeds. And by high speeds, I mean close to the speed of light. The idea is that the faster you move relative to something else, the less time you will experience compared to that thing. So, in the instance of the Planet of the Apes movie, moving at close to the speed of light for about 18 months meant about 2,000 years had passed on Earth. Does that math actually check out? I don't know, and I don't care. It's close enough to the correct idea that I'll accept it. So, sure, the time frame works, but that doesn't explain how a spaceship got so turned around that in an attempt to get to a planet orbiting a distant star, they ended up back on Earth. Now, they do say something went wrong with the ship, which is pretty obvious as it crashes into a lake, but what went wrong with the ship? Well, that's a good question that they even ask directly in the movie. So 3 out of the 4 astronauts survived the crash, and indeed, the fourth, a woman named Stewart, who was supposed to be the Eve in their attempt to colonize the new planet, make of that what you will, died long before the crash, as her stasis pod got an air leak and she died in stasis. Despite the fact that the astronauts, Landon Dodge and our main character Taylor, literally crash landed in a lake, the entirety of the surrounding area is completely barren, which is pretty weird, but they do actually explain that the ground in the area is poisonous, and considering that at the end of the movie, it's highly implied that humans nuked the planet, and this is the remnants of New York City, somewhere that would have been heavily nuked, that makes a lot of sense actually. But weird barren land isn't the only strange thing about this planet, besides the whole ape situation, but we haven't gotten there yet. Our astronauts, specifically Dodge, the scientist of the gang, is also confused by the weather. As he says,
thunder and lightning and no rain. Cloud cover at night. That strange luminosity, yet there's no moon.
Which, okay, one of the problems with movies like this is that it's difficult to know whether the characters are supposed to be stupid or if the writers are a little stupid, because these are not really that confusing. Yes, usually you associate thunderstorms with rain, but that's not technically a necessity. And yeah, a cloudy night sky would pretty easily hide a moon whose light could still be shining through the clouds to create that strange luminosity. Not that we know what the luminosity looks like, because this movie has exactly one night scene, and it's not here. So, either we're supposed to know this, and Dodge is supposed to be stupid, or the writers thought these were weird things to happen, and it would really accentuate how strange this planet is. And if the latter is the case, then they didn't even bother to eventually come up with an explanation for why these things would be happening on what I may remind you is just Earth. Though there's also a third option, technically. Because this planet being Earth is a reveal, it's possible that these strange occurrences are supposed to sound weird at first to add intrigue about the planet, but only after thinking about it do you realize that it's actually not that weird, and makes perfect sense for something that would happen on Earth. And if that is the case, then that's actually pretty clever, and it doesn't even matter that Dodge probably shouldn't be confused by that. So our heroes try to find some plants or something to survive by, because they only have 3 days of food and water, and we're treated to a lot of shots of walking around a desert, including this incredible scene where the 3 astronauts slide down a hill for 30 incredibly long seconds, which is just amazing. This is not going to be the last time a scene goes on for just a little longer than you would expect either. During these travels, we get a nice conversation concisely articulating why each of the 3 astronauts decided to travel into the future where they will never see anyone they know ever again because they're all long dead. Landon did it for the glory, though he'll never experience it himself, so that seems kind of stupid. Dodge did it for a chance to learn something no one else knew, and Taylor did it because he thinks people are awful and wants to get away from them, and potentially find something better than man. And considering humanity blew themselves up in this universe, he might be onto something. This concept of humanity being just the worst is something that'll continue to crop up over the course of the original series, though of course it'll take different forms. In this movie, as makes sense with the whole nuked planet situation, that awfulness mostly comes from human-on-human violence. Indeed, part of Taylor's speech at the beginning of the movie, before everything goes down, asks if hundreds of years in the future, humans still wage war on each other. Taylor will complain about other issues humans have, but human-on-human violence remains the core. Though, interestingly, this is the only movie in the original franchise where there are no human antagonists. The gang does eventually find a waterfall surrounded by plant life, promptly stripping naked, taking a nice swim, and getting all their clothes stolen by the feral, animalistic, mute human residents of this world. Now this scene is important because this movie is technically rated G through very careful camera placement and some leaves, but I don't think it's rated G enough for YouTube considering this bare ass I will not be showing. But it's actually important because it means that while they do get their outfits back, they look a little more similar to the outfits the rest of the humans have, allowing them to accidentally fit in a little bit. The other reason they fit in is because they get shot. Well, Dodge and Taylor get shot. Landon gets whacked. See, about a quarter of the way into the movie, we finally see the namesake of the movie, the apes. And you know what? Not a bad reveal. All of the humans suddenly stopping what they're doing, a strange noise that scares the humans into running off. The astronauts joining in the running because, hey, these humans live here, they probably know something the astronauts don't. Starting to get surrounded. Guns. This face. And then it's revealed that they're being hunted by apes, with what I think is very good makeup, with a nice siren-esque noise to really accentuate the weirdness of that. So while being hunted, Dodge gets shot and killed, Landon gets whacked and disappears for most of the rest of the movie, and Taylor gets shot in the throat. This is important because it means he can't talk, and thus it's harder to prove to the apes that he is intelligent, unlike the humans the apes are used to, and thus the movie can be longer. Of course, speaking isn't the only way to communicate and prove intelligence, especially since the apes can speak and read and write English, which makes sense. They are in New York, after all, and Taylor's not a complete idiot. He can come up with the idea of writing to them, and it's just a matter of figuring out how to write something and have the apes see it. Unfortunately, some of the apes don't want to see it. And I suppose it's here where we should talk about the character of the apes and the society they've built. See, it's not nearly as advanced as ours was in 1968, as while they have rifles and other guns, they also have clay houses and horse-drawn carriages. Horses, by the way, being the only other animal we see besides the apes. Though, I suppose the apes are really three species of animals. Gorillas, which seem to mostly be in the military, orangutans, which are the religious leaders, and because of how this society works, are just the leaders in general, and the chimpanzees, which are everything else, but specifically are scientists, including the two good apes, Dr. Zira and her fiance, Cornelius. Though calling them the good ones is a bit mean to the rest of ape society, because this movie doesn't really have apes as a whole being evil. They might not treat humans very well, but that isn't through malice, but more through the fact that to them, these humans are animals, so who really cares? Taylor is seen as a weird freak of nature because even his eyes showed signs of intelligence that the rest of the human race doesn't seem to have at all. And based on later media, this is an idea that kind of gets lost on people, but that's an issue for a later video. Of course, that's not to say there aren't evil apes in this movie. Specifically, Dr. Zaius, the leader of faith and science in the area, who is also an ape racist. And I don't mean he's racist against humans, I mean this.
You know how he looks down his nose at chimpanzees.
Is the first thing you hear about him before you even get to meet him. It doesn't really come up after that statement, but it is a bit jarring of an introduction to a character who will admittedly become the antagonist of the movie. And antagonize he does, as in a scene where Dr. Zira is trying to convince him Taylor might be intelligent. It is only he who sees the literal writing on the ground of Taylor trying to communicate with them and brushes it away so no one else sees it. Now, I really like this scene because, like a lot of this movie, it builds intrigue, except this intrigue is actually explained, but it takes a bit to get there. First, we have to talk about Zira and Cornelius. See, Taylor does eventually manage to prove he can write by introducing himself to Zira through her notepad. It's just how he gets her notepad that's a little questionable. It starts off normal, with Taylor gesturing to Zira to come closer, and then, since she's clearly responding to his gestures anyways, makes a gesture for writing as a way for Zira to give him the notepad. No, I'm just kidding, that would make too much sense, and Taylor's not all there. Instead, he violently makes a grab for her notepad. This works on the second try because somehow this happens twice, and after Taylor gets beaten for a bit, Zira sees that he's introduced himself on the notepad and brings her into her home so Zira, Taylor, and Cornelius can have a conversation in private. Because Zira and Cornelius are scientists, and above all, they desire the truth. Specifically, they desire the truth about where apes came from, and they suspect that they come from humans, and they've got some decent evidence for it. See, Cornelius is an archaeologist, and while doing some mildly illegal archaeology, found some evidence for not only a less advanced species of apes, but also a more advanced civilization that existed before even then. Meanwhile, Zira, a biologist studying humans, can tell that there's no biological reason they don't talk, which must mean it's a mental thing. Though what kind of mental thing, we of course never find out. And then Taylor shows up, claiming to be from the stars, which by itself is shocking because it's been determined that flight is impossible, and being an intelligent human. And that's some hard evidence that humans on the ape planet, because remember they don't realize it's the same planet, could have been just as intelligent. The problem with this theory, and Taylor existing at all, is that it strongly disagrees with the religious teachings of the apes. Specifically, that apes were created by the Almighty to rule over the beasts. You know, the humans and the horses, and that's about it. And this is the central conflict of the movie, not necessarily Taylor being stuck in a planet of apes, but instead the intellectual fight between Zira and Cornelius on one side and Dr. Zaius on the other because of what Taylor represents. Because what he represents is heresy, and despite the fact that it's the truth could make things complicated. But Dr. Zaius' reasons for hiding the truth are more complicated than just that, but it takes a while to get to those reasons. First, we have to watch Taylor attempt to escape his cage after hearing he's about to be castrated with what is possibly the goofiest chase scene I've ever seen. I understand what they're going for with Taylor getting surrounded and trying to find a way out, but the entire time I was watching this, I thought, where is he trying to go? Because this town does not seem that big, and he's just going everywhere but out of town. This includes a scene where we find out what happened to Dodge after he got killed. He got stuffed and put into what I can only assume is a human museum exhibit. Now, what's fun about this exhibit is that it's very obviously just actors being as still as possible pretending to be exhibits instead of just mannequins or something. And yet, or maybe because of that, Taylor doesn't even pretend to be part of the exhibit. What's the point of having a human exhibit during a chase scene if you're not going to have the guy getting chased hide in the exhibit? But fine. Eventually, after 5 minutes of just kind of running around a little bit, Taylor gets captured again, and finally, halfway through the film, we get the famous line,
Get your stinking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
and now that Taylor can talk again, he can go back to his favorite thing, pontificating about how much humanity sucks. This time, instead of sending a message back home like he was doing at the beginning of the movie, he's talking to Nova. And as you do when you're talking to a pretty... Wait, I should probably explain who Nova is. Nova is a human woman from ape times, and what that means is that she's less of a person and more of an animal. Indeed, she's so much of an animal that she does not have a name until Taylor decides her name is Nova. However, that doesn't stop Zira from deciding to throw Nova in with Taylor as a present so the two can mate. Now, in Zira's defense, this is before she finds out Taylor is as intelligent as the apes, but that doesn't stop Taylor from cuddling and wanting to be around what pretty much becomes his weird human woman pet. So that's something. Now, in Taylor's defense, he does try to get her to say her name, and when she almost smiles, he seems happy to see that he taught her something. So he does want an intelligent woman, it's just that, as he says,
You're the only girl in town.
So Taylor is talking to the only girl in town after they've been put in separate cages because he's a weird freak. And what does he talk about? Well, he talks about how much sex he's had, of course. Admittedly, he doesn't say that much about it, and interestingly, it's framed more as a complaint about the state of his world because
Lots of love making, but no love.
And while that sounds like a man complaining about how much sex he had, a society that prioritizes sex over emotional connection is a problem. So he's kind of got a point. After Taylor talks to Nova about sex and the astronauts' original plan to use Stewart to colonize the planet, he gets dragged to the most farcical attempt at a court scene I've ever seen, and I'm pretty sure that's the point. And also ironic, considering the president of the Academy literally says,
Do not turn this hearing into a farce!
the case involves trying Zira and Cornelius for heresy, and as Taylor is their best evidence for the possibility of apes evolving from humans, he's been brought in. But to do that, they need to prove his intelligence. And unfortunately, a member of the state not interested in truth is the one to question him to prove his intelligence. And what does the orangutan do? Well, he does what anyone who can't possibly fathom that anything different from him is intelligent. He focuses on knowledge instead of reasoning skills, as Zira claims he can do, and questions Taylor about ape society, something he couldn't possibly know. Real cool questions too, like why do men have no souls? Which is a fun question to be asked as a human. It is also in this case that we find out what happened to Landon after he got whacked. Turns out he too got captured and then lobotomized, so he's just as dumb as the rest of the humans, which makes Taylor's case that much harder to prove. Not that it matters what evidence they have, since the council presiding over the trial is too busy literally reenacting see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil to actually listen to anyone anyways. This is a very subtle movie. So the trial obviously doesn't end well for our heroes, which was going to be the case no matter what Zira and Cornelius said, and Taylor is slated to be dissected in the morning. Luckily, Zira and Cornelius, with the help of Zira's nephew Lucius, stage an escape. An escape Taylor does, pretty easily at that, dragging Nova along for the ride. And off the gang goes to Cornelius's archaeology excavation in the Forbidden Zone to see if they can prove their case and avoid being imprisoned for heresy. What's the Forbidden Zone, you ask? Well, it's where Taylor and his crew crash landed, but it's also what's left of New York City, i.e., nothing. Instead, it's just a desert, forbidden by the lawgiver, the ape who wrote the sacred scrolls that are the basis for the ape's religion. Now, I find this interesting because there's two possible reasons the place is forbidden. One, considering that we know the place was nuked, for a while the place probably was deadly with radiation. However, at least in this movie, we don't know how long it was after the nukes dropped that the Sacred Scrolls were written, so it's possible the place was relatively safe by that point. And instead, the real reason to stop Ape from going is so they don't see the obvious evidence of what once was, as Taylor eventually does. It's something interesting to think about, especially since we don't know who the lawgiver was or what his deal was. He clearly made a bunch of stuff up, like God creating Ape to rule over the beasts, and proof that the divine spark exists in the simian brain, whatever that means. But he also talks about how apes kept humans as pets until he proved they couldn't be tamed, and who knows if that's true or not. Now, who the lawgiver is not necessarily important to know for this movie, but it's something interesting to ask about. So they get to the excavation and are very quickly found by Dr. Zaius and the cops, because really where else would they have gone? But we still get to see what Cornelius found that made him believe that there could be an old advanced civilization of man from before the apes. And the evidence is interesting. See, the Sacred Scrolls were written about 1200 years ago, so evidence of an advanced civilization before then would be a bit concerning for the validity of those scrolls, and indeed Cornelius did find evidence of that. But worse yet, he found evidence of that advanced civilization existing about 2,000 years ago, which is of course how long Taylor's been gone, 700 years before a primitive society of apes that existed about 1,300 years ago, and even some time before carnivorous gorillas. And that's pretty damning evidence. But it also asks an interesting question. What happened to the gorillas to make them carnivorous? I mean, yes, gorillas are omnivores, but according to some quick research, in general, they just eat plants and maybe very small animals, like insects, but in general, they're pretty much herbivores. But then again, these are gorillas in New York City, presumably after the nuclear apocalypse, so it's very likely these gorillas didn't have much of a choice in becoming carnivores, and those that could do better survived better, creating a group of carnivorous gorillas. But that's not really something we're meant to focus on. The really important thing in this excavation is the existence of a human doll that can cry, which, at least according to this movie, would only have been made by humans. But before the conversation can go much further, there's a scuffle outside where Lucius is attacked by the cops. The attack is taken care of pretty quickly by Taylor, and finally we get a better explanation of what Dr. Zaius is about. Because it turns out Dr. Zaius had known about the advanced society of men for a long time. But whatever evidence he found of this advanced man made him decide that humanity sucked, specifically due to their extremely warlike tendencies, which in the context of this movie is pretty accurate, and that it would be better for everyone if no one knew about them. He's so worried about advanced humanity that he's scared Taylor is evidence that there's advanced humanity still on this planet, because he still refuses to believe Taylor flew here, and the chance that more people like Taylor could show up would spell doom for the apes, as humans would probably kill them all. Zaius' attempt to castrate Taylor make a lot more sense now too, if you consider that one mutant could cause more mutants to be born. And he's got an interesting point. Since he knows humanity destroyed itself, and even these sacred scrolls talk about the dangers of mankind, though one of the things that talks about is humans hunting for sport, which we see the gorillas do, keeping apes from anything close to advanced humanity could potentially be for the best. Especially since Zaius seems to think that scientific advancement in general, including even flight, is what could cause apekind's downfall. And potentially he's got a point, considering humans did in fact advance themselves to destruction. Now, listen, I am one for truth and advancement of technology that can help people, and advancement of knowledge is required for that. However, anyone that knows anything about history knows that indeed knowledge and technological advancements can cause problems because of the people that wield that power. So while I wouldn't call stifling knowledge a good thing, it is possible that it could allow apes to, while not thrive, at least exist for a pretty long time. Unfortunately, the sequel to this movie exists, so all of Zaius' efforts are for naught, whether you agree with him or not, but that's a problem for another day. And Zaius isn't a complete monster either. He allows Taylor to leave and go on his way, though not before Taylor kisses Zira on the lips, despite the fact that
You're so damned ugly.
and her fiance is right there looking not happy about this, ending the movie with the famous reveal that this was Earth the entire time. And we're left with one question: how did the world end up like this? Yes, it's heavily implied that humanity nuked themselves,
You blew it up!
but people still exist in some form. So, how did we get from a nuked world to apes being the dominant species while humanity whittled away to animals? And that's a really good question that even Taylor asks. Well, see,